Well, welcome to the T-Rex Talk. I am very excited today. I have a special guest, Jay of, you probably know him through PewScience. He also is on Instagram as the Jay Situation and has a podcast called the Jay Situation. So I'm a huge fan of the work that he's been doing in suppressor, basically quantifying suppressor performance, but also not just grading them, but also kind of teaching everybody what the different parts of suppression are. So Jay, great to talk to you. We have chatted several times in the past, but this is our first non-face-to-face public conversation.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's funny because we are face-to-face on video here. Yeah, I know. I love what T-Rex Arms is doing, and it's really cool. I actually just found out about you folks within the past year or two. And it's so cool to see the ecosystem that you guys have built and all the different things you've done. So it's an honor to be on the podcast here. And yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, I will recommend to our listeners, if you're listening to this podcast, perhaps you like podcasts. And Jay, you have a great podcast. You go over a lot of the detail that is in your articles, your scientific articles, you go into in sometimes more depth or sometimes in more explanation, which guys like me find helpful. You recently were testing, for example, the YHM T2 Turbo.
Yes.
I read the article and then I listened to most of the podcast and I was like, this actually, they go well together.
Cool.
It fleshed out a lot of the information and helped me understand it better. So you produce a surprising amount of media for an engineer who is focused on a kind of a niche area of the firearm industry, I would say. Yeah. And I mean that as a series of compliments.
No, I appreciate that, and it's an observation that I guess I know that my output is high relative to most folks that do it, but I guess I don't really think about it until folks say it to me, and you're not the first one who's told me. They're like, "Man, your output's really crazy. How are you doing?" And I guess I got in a rhythm where I knew that when I started when I wrote the Silencer Sound Standard and I started testing and I started publishing my work publicly there online, I knew that people would start to expect a certain cadence. And then I also wanted to keep the research going. And then I had started the podcast before I had launched that data. And I knew that if people were going to get the most out of the data and analysis that I published, I was going to have to give them some kind of supplementary discussion in plain English. Because a lot of the information is pretty high level technically. And a lot of people aren't used to digesting that level of technical rigor in a written form, but I can't sacrifice that rigor because it's very important that it's all written down and published for the what I call the pedigree to be correct and complete. Because this is being peer reviewed by scientists worldwide, inside and outside the firearms industry. Firearm companies have reviewed the data. Certain silencer companies have reviewed the data. So I think that if I continuously publish, it's kind of a package deal. I got to do the podcast and I got to do the articles, and they kind of go together. So
yeah. Well, and there's a huge amount of testing that happens, which is no mean feat either.
Yeah.
The amount of work that it takes to actually collect the data, do the analysis, create the written material, publish the written material, and create all the graphs and the charts and et cetera is pretty great. And I have to say, I think that it's kind of a breath of fresh air for the gun industry, particularly when it comes to silencers. Silencers are a particular interest of mine, but they are this weird little niche part of the gun industry. Up until very recently, they were believed to be illegal. And it seems like there's been a bit of a renaissance where people realize that suppressors are, in fact, attainable. And you can actually file paperwork and get them approved and own them and possess them and shoot them. And you've brought that awareness to a whole new level where not only can you own a suppressor, you can actually quantify its performance.
Yeah.
And this is kind of a new idea for a lot of people, myself included.
Yeah, it's funny. there's a lot of things to silencers in the silencer game in the United States that people have tended to learn as they go. Everyone kind of grew up watching television. You might see a silencer on a gun in a spy movie or maybe an action movie, and you might
and you hear the little
pew pew, and you hear it, and you're like, oh, that's so cool. As a kid, you really love it, and so that's really that's pretty much the extent to which most people get familiar with suppressed small arms. And so, I got into it, and I, did mess with them professionally early in my career. And when I, as a consumer, looked at getting silencers for my weapons, there really wasn't a lot of good technical information published about them. And the technical information or the product performance data that was published was a bit incomplete. And of the information that was more complete, it lacked, I guess I would say, meaning. It didn't really translate to something I could really understand. Like, they would give me a number or give me a metric, and they'd say it's such and such peak decibel level, and I say, okay, well, lower probably means better. And so people would do that. They would say, oh, this silencer has a lower measurement, and they wouldn't really tell you how they got it, but they would tell you this is a lower measurement, and that therefore it's quieter. And then you would buy the silencer. You would find some niche local class 3 dealer somewhere that lived near you. You go to his basement or something. He'd get the silencer out of the safe. There was no silencer shop back then, right? You go to the safe. He pull it out on the counter. You say, this is okay. You do all your paper documents, and you would mail it off, and you'd get your Form 4 back. The dealer would get the Form 4 back probably in a couple months. It really wasn't that long of a wait. Many years ago.
In those early
days, you would just get it back, and you would get the silencer, and you would shoot it, and not a lot of people had them. But then, as you would get more and more, sometimes you'd find a buddy that knew a guy that had a silencer, and you could compare them. And I remember getting silencers together and shooting them, and I remember hearing the different ones being shot without hearing protection, and thinking to myself, man, the way this one sounds is not represented at all by what people told me. It sounded like. I mean, there's got to be a way to quantify this better. There's got to be a way to rank these systems. And I took a long vacation from firearms, and I didn't really involve myself with them a lot. And I came back into the game, and I wanted to go buy the quietest stuff for my rifles. And I went to the internet and Googled and quietest silencers, and I bought some, and ended up they weren't really quiet. And so I got I was like taken aback by the amount of misinformation that had increased over the years I had been away from it. So it started off not that good, and it just got worse. And so I just thought, man, I think I could make a difference here. I think I could change it. So
yeah, and I think this is a really cool trend. You are probably the best example that I can think of in this particular area. But overall, just in general, I would say that one of the really neat things that has happened with the internet is that firearm knowledge has stopped being forbidden knowledge.
Yeah.
And people have stopped treating it as if it is forbidden knowledge. Obviously, there's still people out there who gatekeep. There's still people out there who, talk about stuff that isn't available for public consumption, whatever. But in general, the amount of people who are talking about body armor tests, suppressor tests, filming video through different types of night vision tubes and explaining what the different blemishes and FOM, what those things mean with visual examples, like all of this sort of archaic hidden knowledge is becoming much more commonplace and much more comparable. And I think you were doing it at the highest scientific study level. And I really appreciate that, because I remember... so my background is not firearms or engineering. It is film and television and animation. And so I knew a little bit about audio from a audio recording and mixing perspective. So I knew that there's a lot to sound.
Yeah.
It's not just loud and quiet. There are different frequencies of sound.
Yeah.
And if your sample rate isn't high enough on your recorder, you don't actually even hear the peak of the sound effect that you were trying to capture.
That's
so
right, yeah.
When I would look at silencer ratings in the olden days, I'd be like, man, I just don't know what frequency were they measuring, and was the sample rate high enough to hear the thing that was the most loudest? And is the thing that is the most loudest actually the most damaging to my personal ear? I just have so many questions. So it is fascinating that you have stepped up, and across the board, a lot of people have stepped up in the firearm industry to try to understand some of these really complicated things like night vision, explain how they work, and then document different types, and then explain, give examples so that people can, see a wide example of things, like on your site, scores for lots of suppressors. And then if they know one guy that has a suppressor, they listen to that suppressor, see all of your data, and are like, context. Yeah. Now I know that I want a Sandman, or I want this, or I want that.
Yeah, that's so powerful. It's such a good point, because, information's always great. We always love information, but information with context, that's where the power is. Because and before you couldn't do that, because you brought up an excellent point. You say, gosh, we might be missing part of an acoustic wave or a pressure wave because we're not sampling fast enough. Okay, so let's sample really fast. Well, how fast do we need to sample? Well, there are some rules. There are some rules, some scientific rules that we follow about how fast we sample based upon what we would like to recreate from the waveform, what type of wave shape we would like to create. There are some rules. So I decided to sample very fast, as fast as I could practically, with some certain limitations, as fast as I thought I needed to. We can go faster. We just don't need to go faster right now. So I picked a speed, and then by doing that, I'm able to capture the entire window in time of the entire combustion event. So when I do all of the analysis and I boil the entire event down to what I call the suppression rating, which is the number you see in the rankings table on the website where folks can compare apples to apples, I've done it so that you can actually compare all those numbers to each other. Whereas before, if you had a peak transient that was happening just over a very short amount of time, it was a fleeting moment in that entire waveform, trying to compare that one peak to another peak measured from another waveform in another time period, it's sometimes contextual, but more often than not, it's not. So you need an overall metric that captures the whole waveform, and so that's what the suppression rating does. So now you're right. If your buddy has XYZ silencer and you shoot it on your hunting rifle, and your other buddy has a Scar and he shoots a different silencer, and you can have they're two completely different sounds. But if you have if you had a suppression rating for both measured at the same location, the hearing damage risk potential would be comparable. And that often correlates to perception, although perception can sometimes be clouded. So it's the best we got. So we focus on objective inner ear response, and that's what the standard's focused on.
Yeah. So that, I think, is, again, I've said it before, tremendously helpful. And I've also just appreciated, coming from a non-engineering background, and I'm now fairly involved in manufacturing and engineering of tooling and things. I have actually really enjoyed the journey of this and getting to kind of nerd out on some of these things and really think about what the nitty-gritty details mean. But in many ways, that journey my personal journey feels similar to one that a lot of folks have gone on in the firearm industry, where we went from anecdotal data and FUD lore to, as the information has become less secret, and firearm hobbies are no longer a thing that you hide. They're actually a thing that you talk about on Instagram and Facebook, to the extent that the overlords allow that, of course.
That's right.
People with understanding and areas of expertise, and people who have context for how these things could actually be tested or measured come along and are like, hey, I see that you are interested in X. I actually have spent the last 10 years doing fluid dynamics research, which allows me to explain to you what is happening inside this combustion chamber. And all of us, sort of basement nerds are like, oh, you can, a combustion event takes place over time and not in an instant. Tell us more. Like, there's tools that have been designed by rocket scientists to measure this stuff.
Yeah, it's wild.
Show us pictures.
Right? Yeah.
So it has been really fun to watch people who have a high level of understanding in adjacent fields come along and explain some of this stuff to those of us who are interested and don't really have the background.
Yeah.
And the number of folks who latch onto this information are like, now it makes sense. That light bulb moment is just super fun to see.
Yeah, and I think with any type of education, it's all about how it's presented. And I do realize that, I mean, I do get some feedback where, people will read my articles and they say, hey, man, like, I do not understand this. And I'm like, that's okay. I do a podcast and I will totally explain this to you. And some people are like, you know what? Podcasts aren't my thing. And I'm like, you know what? I respect that too. Shoot me an email. If there's something you don't understand, if there's something you would like me to explain in a different way, I can do that. And everyone learns differently. Everyone learns at different speeds. Some people have to hear things a certain number of times. Some people have to have concepts relayed to them in a way that is in a different context. And I really don't think anybody interested in firearms or suppressed weapons is like too dumb to understand it. They just need to have the patience and the passion to want to know. And if you don't want to understand it, I have definitely run into some folks like that in the industry, particularly where they don't want to know. They just don't care. And I'm like, that's cool, dude. Like, this isn't your sauce. Like, you don't like the taste. That's fine.
Yeah.
So,
well, I'm that way about certain things too. Like I am fascinated by radio communications, and I'm fascinated by the idea of encryption.
yeah.
When I actually start to talk to cryptologists, I'm like, no, I don't actually want to understand anymore. I don't know why, but I suddenly lost all interest.
This algorithm is boring. There's way too many. I don't like it. I understand. There was a joke. I used to work for the government, and we had a joke. They said, how can you tell an extrovert NSA analyst from an introvert? And they would say that the extrovert NSA analyst looked at your shoes when he talked instead of his own. And I found that funny because a lot of those cryptographer guys, or the signal analyst guys, which isn't too far removed from what I do, is they're kind of out there. But what they do is amazing. And I like you, I find encryption technology to be fascinating. But yeah, I'm not really interested in doing it.
There's a lot of stuff that I want to get under the hood of, and that's theoretically one of them. But in real life, actually, no, it turns out to not be one of them.
Do you ever feel like, because you're a techie guy, you get fascinated by these, things that involve with technology, or whether it's how a silencer works or radio works or whatever. Do you ever feel like you really want to know a lot of stuff, but you just don't have enough time to figure it all out?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. The ruthless prioritization has prevented me from going on a number of deep dives that sound super fun. But the good news is my kids are getting old enough that when they are interested in stuff, now I can kind of justify that a little more. So as my kids get older, good. I think we're gonna do hobbies. I actually have a theory. One of my theories, and maybe I'll record a podcast about it, is that I don't have time for my own hobbies anymore, but I have kids. My kids are gonna have hobbies.
That's right.
Those are gonna be my hobbies.
Yeah, maybe they'll pick cool ones. You never know, right?
Well, I feel like I am slightly
influencing
having a hand in this already.
I guess you can play God a little. You can be like, gosh, wouldn't it be cool if you learned this martial art? And you're like, what? Or something. I don't know. But no, that's really cool.
I hung a drone up in my son's room.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, he already loved drones.
Oh, that's
so
cool.
we're already on that path.
Man, drones have gotten crazy. I was on social media the other day, and there's this gentleman. I think his name is Nick. I think he writes for the Firearm Blog, and he has...
Oh yeah, Nick Chen.
Yeah, Nick Chen
comes up on this podcast a lot, and Nick is a friend of mine. I can't believe he hadn't been on the podcast. You are, I think, the third or fourth guest.
That's funny.
To talk about how cool Nick is. So, or maybe the running joke of this podcast is he will never be on here. We will always
just talk about him because he talked to me earlier today. We were talking about the HK416 because he saw me. I posted one today along with my podcast because I got this like this wild hair to build an HK416 clone. And because Brownell's released these parts kits, so I went and bought a bunch, and I was messing with it. And he, I guess, has messed with one already too. And so he was asking me, he's like, "Hey man, like, how are you running that as a machine gun? Because it has, because typically the HK416 bolt carrier has a, I believe it's a firing pin safety that, so you need a special hammer so it can cycle. And he had done that with, I don't know, something else, or he had like a rare breed forced reset trigger or something. But what he didn't realize, I think, is that the BRN system has the Brownell system has a carrier that can work. It has a safety removed, so it can work with any trigger group. So we were talking about that today, and he was telling me I should get a forced reset trigger, and so, because I just got what did I order? I think it's coming this week. HK sells an MR556, which is a semi-automatic version of the 416. It's kind of neutered and everything, but I don't want to turn it into a machine gun because I have to mill the pocket for the auto sear and everything. So it's like I built a clone 416 to use it as a machine gun, and now I'm buying the real HK that's not a machine gun, so it feels weird. It's like,
No, I hear you. Yeah.
So Nick knows all about that stuff. Nick's like on the cutting edge. So like I saw him.
He's fascinating. He is doing some of the best work. He's actually who I had in the back of my mind when I was talking about guys who get these weird esoteric night vision devices and then document not just like the specs, but take pictures of them, comparing them to other devices, showing different lasers and illuminators through each device. Like, excellent.
He really does a great job of looking at the practical things. And when you were talking about drones, that's what reminded me, going back to that so I don't lose my train of thought. He has put he's been doing thermal drone stuff. And I'm really into thermal sighting systems. It's something I've used a lot for predator control and invasive hog eradication in Texas. And I just love, who doesn't love to see in infrared? I mean, it's like one of the coolest. Like ever since you're a kid, you're like, you want to use it.
It is a superpower.
It's a superpower. It turns you into a superhero. So I saw he was posting, and I don't know exactly the systems he's using, but he's using them on drones, and he's having them autonomously navigate to set waypoints, and he's navigating with and he's viewing long wave infrared. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, that's pretty high tech. So I don't know.
And he's doing it in a way that fascinates me, but I just don't have I don't have the patience for what he has built, because what he has done is he is flying his Mavic, his enterprise level Mavic, with the thermal camera package using ATAC. And then he's giving it waypoints using a laser designator that talks to ATAC. Now, this is theoretically simple and easy, but there's like 8 different versions of ATAC that work with certain plugins, and there's certain plugins that don't work with certain versions of ATAC. So good on him. That is exactly the kind of project that I love. You'd think it would be right up my alley. It's the sort of thing that I want to play with.
And I think it's great that people like him are showing consumers what's possible. And there was something he posted the other day. It was like yesterday, the day before, or something, where someone got really upset with him because he posted a video or something about a technology that I guess happens to have some ties to military technology. And the guy kind of got all high and mighty and was like, "I'm gonna tell the authorities."
Yeah. The guy assumed that his thermal laser rangefinder spotter package that he was using was liberated, tactically resourced from a military base.
I see.
And got really hot under the collar that he would have bought something like this on the black market.
Yeah.
But what most people don't know is a lot of this stuff is not restricted. And if you are a civilian and you do the right paperwork, you can totally buy it from the exact same person that is selling it to the military, and there's nothing sketchy about it at all. But most people don't know that. Most people assume that this stuff is restricted. I've talked to a lot of people who think that night vision is military only, and the only restrictions are actually
export, right? ITAR.
Yeah, the ITAR stuff. So there's removing some of these stigmas, I think, is is really helpful and good for our community.
Yeah, it's important.
But also just to let people see the possibilities.
Yeah.
And I think it is helpful when Nick does stuff where he builds out a thing that works. And then, if you let your imagination run a little bit, you would say like, oh, well, I'll bet you these other drone systems have a similarly capable integration with other stuff that I know is out there. So I think it's really helpful people, showing people that they could, maybe connect the dots on some of the information that isn't out there, have some assumptions on like certain things that you see being used in different conflicts, how they might work with other pieces of technology, and
absolutely
gets the gears turning, which is fun.
Yeah, it gives knowledge is power. I wouldn't know half the stuff I know without, I think, people just having the motivation to share. I think that's something that's important that we need to do in not only the firearms community, but I think this is probably applicable to life, where if you're passionate about something and you feel that something's cool, sharing that with others is key. You can't just keep everything to yourself. Yeah. You gotta help educate folks. I think I see that with I tell you, man, T-Rex Arms. I had no idea who you guys were. I'm like never watch YouTube or anything, and so I start doing stuff in the silencer industry, and it's like, okay, I need to know what's going on. So I go to YouTube and I see the Grantham guy, and he's a very nice person. I met him. I talked with him before.
Yeah, Mike is
he's very nice. I like him. So I saw him, and it opened this ecosystem. So I was like, okay, what's going on with these very large YouTube channels? And then I see this kid, and he's doing these movements with his rifle, and it looks like he's a robot. I swear to God, I'm looking, and I'm like, who is this dude? I'm like, he literally looks like an aimbot from a video game. But back when I used to play, like when I was a kid, like a long time ago, remember that game Half-Life?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Half-Life deathmatches were my first-person shooter multiplayer experience.
We're probably similar in age, because I got the Counter-Strike beta. It was like beta 0.7 or something like that. And I played Counter-Strike. I think I was in undergrad at college or something. It was like 2001. Something like that.
Oh yeah, that's exactly when I was doing that exact same LAN party thing.
Yeah, I was doing like Quake 3
with Day of Defeat.
Yeah, I was doing like Quake 3 Arena and like Unreal Tournament and like all these like Twitch type games where like, I know that Twitch is a thing now, but back then we called Twitch gaming like the fact that your head's on a swivel. Yeah. So yeah, I see this kid on YouTube. It's Lucas. He's on YouTube and he's shooting, and I could not believe. And it's not that it was just yeah, he's a good shooter. Fine. It wasn't necessarily him that I was surprised at. It was a world that I was not in this tactical world of like, I was just like, I like guns. I like shooting guns. Target practice is cool. I actually used to work for the military, so I'm familiar with the military, but I didn't know that this whole world even exists. So now it's gotten to the point where, yeah, I just saw, you guys did this really, really long video on a rifle. There's a review, was very good, and you're exposing all of these people to this subject where I think it's great. I mean, the amount of information people have on firearms now, it's proliferating so fast. It's awesome.
I'm excited by it. I'm excited that there is this destigmatization of the topic.
Absolutely.
And even the destigmatization of the nerdy engineering stuff. Like people, I think with that video that you mentioned, where we tested, and we did not do a super scientific like laboratory test of that rifle. We did an extremely real world test, and I think that what T-Rex is best at is starting the conversation. Like that's not the be all end all video of how you test rifles. That's the beginning of a conversation. And experts like you will be the guys who figure out, how you do that to a high level. But this is the introduction to a more serious, measured approach of this topic. And then the real experts will come out of the woodwork.
Yeah. Engage
the audience that we have built and explain how stuff really works.
It's cool.
And I think that's a really great dynamic.
No, it was good. And one thing I liked about it, I watched the whole thing actually. I actually don't usually watch YouTube, not because I don't like watching video, but because I don't have, that's a very dangerous thing to say. It's because I don't allocate the time to watch it. Okay, so but this time it was I was actually down with the flu for like a week. It was sucked, and so I was recovering, and I'm much busier preparing some publications or analysis or something, and I had some time to kind of veg out and relax. I made myself relax, and I watched the entire thing, watched the whole video from start to finish, which is very cool to be able to do because it was a long video. And one thing I really loved was the way it was presented, filmed, and even you got your guy, and I just followed him, and I'm gonna butcher his name. It'll start with the C. He was one of your armorers.
Was it Josh Lowry?
Oh, that makes sense. Because do you do a lot of the editing and stuff? Or
So I actually don't. I have edited the videos that I am in, and I have edited some of the other videos. But this video, Chad was the guy who made this video happen. And kudos to Chad for making a very long video engaging and
Cool.
and make it work as a piece of content that was really kept you watching. I mean, that's been the thing that I struggle with my videos, because I pick boring topics, and making them interesting and making people be able to follow them is it's kind of my struggle. It's kind of my aim.
Well,
and Chad did just an effortless job with this Arrow video.
I had like an hour long call with Aero Precision yesterday about something else, and they're so cool. Or the guy I talked to was really cool, and I just think that's neat that he was mentioning that he had talked with you guys too, or their company had, which I think is really cool after a video like that, or even before the video.
Yeah, and our hope is, this is another thing about the firearm industry. Let me know if this is your take, and don't use any names if people come to mind.
Okay.
I'm very new to the firearm industry as being in it.
Yeah.
It is a pretty standoffish industry. Everybody has a little bit more of a chip on their shoulder, I think, than other industries. Other industries, full of jerks as well.
Yes.
The firearm industry does not have the corner on the jerk market. But because the firearm industry is constantly under fire, constantly being persecuted, constantly being deplatformed, I think that all of us do have more of a chip on our shoulder and a little bit higher level of distrust than a lot of other industries. And I think that we really do need to kind of fight against that tendency, because I think it's totally understandable. But is that something that you would say that you've seen, or do you have a slightly different?
Well,
I mean, you are a little bit different because you are a professional tester.
Yeah,
of other
but
people's
man,
stuff.
You know how like I texted you and I was like, "Hey man, I'm running a little late. I got to put out a fire." Because I want to answer your question, but at the same time, I also want to add like my experience. So, because I'm very, very, very new to the firearms industry. I started PewScience in 2019 officially, and I started publishing data analysis publicly in 2020. Okay, so that's only 3 years.
Yeah.
That's infant stuff, and I've been in professional practice for 17 years. So my professional practice, 15. Actually in November last month was 15 years in the private sector of professional engineering practice, and my other experience was in the public sector for the U.S. government, and that doesn't count graduate research before that in graduate school, and so. My engineering practice, I've always been used to, the fact that, yeah, sure, there are some like, what'd you say, that the firearm doesn't have a monopoly on, what'd you call them?
Just jerks.
Jerks. That's a good word.
They're out there.
Jerks. That's an excellent. I like that.
They're everywhere.
I like that word. They're everywhere. Statistically, we're going to run into, there is an allocation of jerks in the human biome that we got them. We can't get away from them. There's going to be a percentage. In the professional world, probably in the film world, similar to the engineering world, there are jerks, but
oh yeah, the jerks come across a very different way in the film industry. In showbiz, I mean, you got prima donnas, but
sure,
yeah, it manifests.
Yeah, the jerkdom manifests differently in those industries. And one thing, and I've talked about this on my podcast before, and this is one of my theories. One of my theories is the barrier of entry to any group dictates the level of visible jerks and the quality of the people in the group. So, which goes hand in hand, probably. Because, with a super low quality group, you're probably going to have more jerks. Because no one likes jerks. So, you're a professional engineer. You're not hanging out with, like, a bunch of people that are not of your caliber. And that's not to be conceited or toot my own horn. It's just not. Doctors don't hang out with, strippers. Well, no, that's not true. They probably do. But you know what I mean, right? Like you have demographics. you got demographics and you have groups. So in the firearms industry, because the barrier of entry is zero, there is no barrier of entry, which is both. It is the tremendous blessing and a tremendous curse. Mm-hmm. So you have personalities that are free to enter the industry, become extremely successful by whatever means necessary, just like any other. And then they might have very low moral qualities, and those will manifest in a very visible way, in whatever way they choose to let them. And that is it's happened, and it was one of the biggest wake-up calls I ever had to endure was entering this industry and having seen it before as a consumer, but then being subjected to it personally from different companies attacking my company. It was just, and it even happened today. And that's why I was kind of late to the call, just because not because I was dealing with it personally, but because I was inundated with communication from others letting me know that it occurred.
Right. Yeah.
And so, I had to make a decision. I need to take inventory of the situation. Do I need to make a statement? Do I not? I usually don't. I usually let it ride and see where it goes.
Yeah.
And so when that stuff happens, it first used to shock me. Because I was so not used to people being so brazenly unprofessional, to the point where they say things that are so incredibly unprofessional. You look at it and you think you're sometimes, I'm just like, I'll tell my family, I'm like, I think I'm taking crazy pills. These people are off their rockers. I don't understand if they're real or not. Like the things they say are so incredibly unprofessional. And then I realized, you know what? They're just like that. And there's nothing really I can do about it except to maintain a professional standard and keep raising the bar.
Yeah, set a good example. Yeah.
Yeah, you know what I mean?
Raise the
That's
bar.
all you can do.
Yeah. And I think that that's a really interesting point. So let's take lawyers, for example. Lawyers have a pretty high jerk ratio.
Yeah.
But they're held to a very professional standard in certain areas. So lawyers behave like jerks in ways that other people don't, because the alternative is to be disbarred. So
bingo.
There are some controls and things that are there in a tightly regulated system.
Yeah.
And I actually really love that the firearm industry, as a group has less of that regulation. Now we do have plenty of other regulations.
Sure.
And so I completely agree with your no barrier to entry. If you want to be in the firearm industry, start making some stickers, post on Instagram,
Yes.
Call yourself a gun tuber.
It's awesome.
You are now in.
Yeah.
And that free Wild West kind of nature is very cool. I'm glad that there's not a board.
Yeah.
Do you think either of us would be in if there was a board?
Oh, no, we would not.
Yeah. Well, and what's the Groucho Marx quote? He's like, I have no interest in being a part of a club that would ever admit me as a member, something like that.
Yeah.
But I think that there's another part of this, which is on another level for people who want to do serious firearm business, something beyond stickers and drop shipping. There's a very high barrier to entry. There are very few industries that are as externally regulated. Like,
True.
If you're in the firearm industry doing actual firearm stuff, like how many legislators want to shut down your company? 80%. How many banks want to shut down your company?
Yeah.
90%. How many online platforms are you going to have to deal with that are really hostile to your livelihood? Most. And so what you end up with, I think, is people who are really super possessive, and they wake up every morning knowing that everybody is trying to destroy their company. And so when a bad review comes out, they're like, well, of course, everyone wants to destroy my company. Why would this reviewer be any different? And I think that is another factor that is here for the people who are, there's plenty of people who I would say are bad faith assumers. And then I think there's plenty of good faith assumers who assume the wrong thing just because they are so constantly under attack. And so
That's
I really
true.
appreciate that you are, not only raising the bar in a scientific, and documentation way, but we need good examples, and we need people who are cheerful and excited all the time. At SHOT Show, I regularly meet guys, and I'm like, dude, your business is booming. How nice for you. And they're like, yeah, but you know what happened last week?
Oh, they have focused on the negative. Yeah, no, yeah.
That's my tendency. Like it takes deliberate effort.
Well, there's also high performers are often very critical of themselves because yes, we learn by making mistakes, but depending on your upbringing, there's probably all kinds of psychological things. But on average, I would argue that high performers are often very critical of themselves because they want to achieve perfection. They later figure out that perfection is often not possible, but they still chase it. They still chase it, and it's important. It's important to fail. It's important to be self-critical. But you also got to stop and smell the roses, as they say. I always get told that I'm trying to work on that, but it's true. I mean, I think that raising the bar, I guess in the silencer zeitgeist, in the the silencer industry and the firearms industry, man, I have been so pleasantly surprised with consumers and how genuinely good-natured people are. When I do something, one of my greatest joys is helping people. That's one of the reasons. That's like the ethos of my company. PewScience doesn't exist in a vacuum. If it didn't help people, I wouldn't be doing it. I mean, it's a lot of work, so it's really hard, right?
Yeah.
So when I get feedback from folks that tell me that I've helped them, and I actually answered an email from a gentleman today. He's a staff sergeant in Special Operations Command, and he wrote this long email, and the entire thing was thanking me for helping him do XYZ and his experiences with the suppressed weapons in his service, and then him personally with his family, and how his experiences were fostered and were congruent with the data I have published, and da-da-da-da. And I just read that, and I was sitting there, and I was just like, this is what it's all about, man. And so that gives me the faith that I know if there's one guy like that, there's more. And there is. I see it all the time. So I see all these negative people that, it's all noise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's all like, and some people are very reactive, and I have been, I'm a pretty impulsive person. But like I've learned to kind of rein that in. It's like you just got to kind of take a step back, and so that's my opinion about that.
There's a lot of signal into the noise. Yeah. Well, I was curious about your impressions because not only are you new to the industry, not only do you have contacts from other industries, but you also have taken a little bit of a lightning rod position, which would give you a unique perspective. So I like to ask this question partly just for my own selfish interest because I'm new to the industry, but also because I think there's I think that you have you're an example. With great power comes great responsibility. You are a very visible and I think super helpful example. We at T-Rex are trying to be a good example, and we keep changing as a company. Like we went from being a small holster company to a medium-sized holster company. Now we're also a medium-sized retail company. And so we want to be good examples at all those different things. And, we're a fairly large YouTube channel. We want to be a good example of what that is. And so we are endeavoring to do that. But I am, for as much as we can complain about the jerks that are out there, I am super excited and encouraged by this new generation, gun culture 3.0.
Yeah.
The new industry. Like, it is fascinating, and I really love being a part of it. And, I also have had some time in another industry where it's like, it's really annoying when people are a jerk in such an unprofessional way, but I do like it better than a lawyer who is 100% polite and then totally cheats
Oh,
you
that's the worst, man. When they're polite to your
in
face.
a way that is totally legal and will not get him disbarred.
Dude.
That kind of thing. Or in the showbiz industry, where it's actually way worse.
I'm not used to it. I'm getting more used to it, but this industry is so different. And
it's the Wild West. I mean,
it's the Wild West. And one thing I know, and you touched on it earlier, like I said, and you said too, it's really great we don't have as many regulations, because if we have too many regulations, I think folks that are anti-Second Amendment will take things away, and it's kind of it's kind of a double-edged sword. If let's say, for example, we started having professional safety standards for firearms and silencers, like design standards, like you would, I don't know, in the aircraft industry, or in the building industry, or anywhere where licensed professional engineers like myself are charged with protecting the public. Like, I don't know, the silencer sound standard that gives a hearing damage risk. Like, if you actually had that as a regulation, I think that there would be politicians that would try to leverage those regulations against the populace, and specifically against the manufacturers of weapons, to outlaw the weapons.
Oh, 100%.
And that's terrible, because it's like we would get much better products if there were tighter regulations on the products. We would get so much better products. Costs would go up. Labor would go up, design fees would go up, and you'd have to use licensed engineers. Your cost would go up, but the products would be more awesome. But then we might lose them all, and it's like, oh, how stupid is that?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm a free market guy for a number of reasons, but that's one of them. And I think that we're starting to see that in the automotive industry, and in the aerospace industry, where politicians are like, let's create an impossible standard because gas cars are bad.
Yeah.
And let's just make it harder to build a gas car, because
it's so dumb. And it's like, I met with one of the organizations that is launching people into space. That was like day job stuff. I was talking with them about things, and talking with them and then talking with NASA, who I've spoken with before. They both have a ton of rocket scientists. They're both doing incredibly difficult things to send people into orbit, and the way they speak about it is so much different in the private sector that it's like, it's just a different, like,
this kind of brings me back to a point that I really like, which is people need to be self-governing, because if they will not govern themselves, a bunch of folks are going to come along and govern them from the outside. So if the gun industry or the firearm industry can make better, safer products, there isn't going to be this push to create an entirely new House congressional, some kind of crazy regulatory board that runs the firearm industry and sets impossible standards, like microstamping. Microstamping is the perfect example of something that is physically impossible and exists purely to make guns not purchasable in California. We need to work on being self-governing, and as individuals and as an industry and as communities, because if we're not going to do that, then you really don't have much of an argument against.
You don't, and
other government.
Whenever I think about, the main thing I think about with product safety, the firearms industry, I mean, sure, silencers make guns less loud, sure, but silencer industry is still small relative to the firearm industry as a whole. And what I think about a lot of times with firearm safety, there are tons of things that can go wrong. I do think about the accidental discharges I've seen with certain handguns recently, and you know what? To tell you the truth, I haven't even shot a SIG. What is it? The 320? Is the 320 the one that's having issues or had issues?
It's the one that had the original drop issues. Yeah.
Okay. And I keep seeing people talk about them still, and I'm not sure if that's old information that's just being regurgitated, or if it's
it's a fun meme, which makes it hard to really determine if it just lives on as a meme.
Because it almost seems like, because people are talking about it so much, it almost seems like just to the casual observer or the meme connoisseur that it's like some kind of persistent issue, which is very disconcerting to me because it's like a handgun, and it's like, man, how can a modern handgun from a multinational firearms corporation have a safety issue? Like, that doesn't even compute with me. Like, I'm like, what?
Some of the guys here visited SIG, and our engineer asked some of their engineers that very question. And I'm not going to, I can't remember exactly, but I know that sometimes these issues are quality control issues when you do, when you're, especially for firearms industry people, we're used to fairly small companies, and occasionally a fairly small company will explode like BCM. BCM had the highest quality ARs, which drove massive growth, which meant they had to increase volume hugely. So they built a new factory, they moved to the new factory, new equipment, new tooling, new hires, and there were a couple times that quality control slipped during that super rapid expansion. So yeah, it's interesting. It's a very interesting problem to solve. Designing within the constraints of quality control issues that you may not be able to control in the future.
Yeah, no joke. I mean,
you got to stay right on top of that.
Yeah, and I haven't dug into the technical reasons why those failures were happening much, but I did a little bit. And I started looking at some of the mechanisms, and I could see how, it could certainly manifest if you were not paying attention to both quality control after a part was made, but also during assembly.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's kind of like, that's a labor thing too, but yeah, man. So
it's a hard thing to quantify, I'm sure, when you're a company with 200 employees and suddenly the demand is so high that you could easily keep 400 employees busy making guns and sell them all. And so now you really want to do that. And yeah.
That's right. You really want to do that. Yeah. It's like that reminds me, people ask me, how are you going to scale PewScience? How are you going to hire people?
Yeah.
And I always think to myself, I'm like, yeah, I could, but also Silencer could just like go away tomorrow.
Right. Yeah.
I really do think that.
This is definitely something that I think drives some of the insecurity in the firearm industry. Is I think all of us feel that. And we see things happen in the industry where the demand is high. The opportunity, like here at T-Rex, we have over 80 employees, which is huge for a company that's 10 years ago was one person in a single car garage. That is pretty rapid growth.
Absolutely.
And Hickman County is not huge. So we're not the biggest employer in the county, but we employ a lot of people that I want to keep employing. Regardless of what happens in the firearm industry. So there's a level of pressure that is there. Holsters are a much safer thing to get involved in than super high level analysis of suppressors, which are a little bit more on the bubble, I would say.
I'm a little fringe.
Yeah. But that's, I think that is a real consideration for a lot of people. And even, giant companies like SIG, I'm sure that one of the things on their, profit and loss statement as they were trying to figure out rapidly growing the company is like, hey, we can employ a whole bunch more people here in this New England town that need jobs. And so that's a thing that probably drove some decisions. BCM, probably the same. Like a lot of these little companies that are very plugged into their communities, the opportunity to grow and hire people and raise the standard of living in the town has to be weighed against, the quality control issues and various other growing pains that you will run into. And it's interesting. And in some industries, I have met people who could not care less about either how many people they hire or the consequences of that, because they're in a giant industry and there's industry standard for this. This isn't a thing that you personally decide or not. It's something that the board decides or something that this decides. There's a regulatory thing or whatever. But one of the cool things about this wild west of a firearm industry is most of us are not business people, so we have no experience. And there's a lot of cons that come with that. But one of the pros is I think a lot of gun people think about business in a much purer kind of way. We haven't been desensitized to how you actually run business and fire people. Like if I had sat through enough, training, you hire people, you fire people, it's no big deal. Like if I had done a business course in college that taught me that, I would approach firing people differently than never having done it before, and then suddenly having to do it.
No, that's interesting. That's really interesting. Now that I've been a consulting engineer for a long time in a firm that started very small, its principles were kind of formed in a similar way to where, they don't want to fire people if they don't have to fire. It's like they're a family, right?
Yeah.
You start small, you grow. Eventually, sure, you're going to get to maybe you'll become a large corporation and things, and but when the inner workings of a company are still, less than 200 people, you kind of feel like you almost have skin in the game with regard to like a family unit for your staff. And you feel that, not obligation, but you do feel like an extreme empathy for like, their lives and the lives of their families. And so, I think that's really important. And I think in the firearms industry, I think because some of the businesses are so small and that's how they start, that's probably good. Although I have heard some horror stories about some of the larger businesses. Yeah. But hey, like you said, there's tricks everywhere. So
but it is. You go to SHOT Show, and Glock has a giant booth. SIG has a giant booth. There's a lot of, and in SHOT Show is of course not just the gun industry. It is the hunting and outdoor industry. Like there's plenty of giant companies that go to SHOT Show, but there's all these little gun companies where they have a booth. They have 4 people on the floor, and those are the employees of the company, So that's
you guys seem to, I don't know how many of you folks that are family members work at your company, but it seems like a pretty close-knit group that I guess has the same principles and core ideals that keep it going. So it seems pretty cool.
It has been really great. I know people complain sometimes about being involved in family business because of the emotions and so forth, but I mean, it's like any relationship. The closer the relationship, the more opportunities to, rub each other the wrong way. But I would say the benefits of pre-existing strong relationships are really good. And I think that has, cool. I love it. I love working with my brothers. And as the team has grown, it's been really neat to be able to hire people. Not that I'm encouraging you to necessarily hire a bunch of people for PewScience, but when you are able to hire people that bring a lot of value to the mission and are also people that you really enjoy working with, it's pretty great. It's not something that everybody gets to do, and so when you do get to do it, it's a pretty neat experience.
Yeah, it seems like it can be pretty rewarding. I like, my day job, I like to hire, I've hired people, and, it's not the same when you don't own the company, right?
Yeah.
But, finding the passionate individuals. It's funny. I talked about early on, I was doing a podcast once, like, I don't know, last year or something, and I was talking about, like, I joked that I was, like, going to need an intern or something. And I got, like, probably 50 resumes.
Yeah.
And I was like, whoa. And I filed them all, and I responded to them all. I responded to all the folks and told you, hey, not hiring right now, but I will keep you in mind for future opportunities. Yeah. Or whatever I thought like the official HR response should be for a one-man show. But it was cool. And it showed me some of these guys had sent cover letters, man. They're like, this is what I want to do. This is what I've done. Check it out. This is what I can do. And it's going to be awesome. I'm like, this is actually really cool. And I think a lot of people are motivated. So it would be cool to become a larger test lab.
Yeah. And this is another thing that's very cool about the gun industry. Like there are oftentimes you find folks who could really excel at a job that would pay them 6 figures. Like 6 figures is the starting price for what they would be doing in the non-firearm world. And they have chosen to do something that they love instead. Something that does have the stigma attached to it. And this is getting kind of more interesting and more pronounced as the gun industry gets a little more technical. If you want to be a cutting edge programmer, work in augmented reality or something like that, your options are A, work for Facebook with the best engineers and the unlimitedest budget possible. Like
Yeah.
even better than the US government is some of these giant tech companies.
For sure. Like the GDP of some nations is smaller than
Yeah.
Facebook.
Or you can go do your own thing pretty alone in this other field. And so yeah, it's kind of interesting. I'm hoping that we can find, because I keep bumping into I would say more principled people, not even for the firearm industry, but guys who are like, so the best research that's being done in this field is being done by Google for the purpose of radio communication and carrier stuff. I don't want to be a part of that. I'm hanging up my own shingle. I want to build something decentralized that apparently has no cash flow opportunities.
Oh, man.
And I'm like, I would like to help. I think that's important.
Yeah.
There's no percentage in it, but I think
That's cool.
think that our communities need some of these alternative
Kind
economies.
of interesting because when I was doing sound testing stuff initially, I talked with my contacts and some of the government labs about it and about some of the codes they had developed. And when I talked with them, it was basically like, you're chasing a dead end, like they're not giving us any funding anymore. Da, 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 da. It's not like they were demotivated because or something. These guys had worked at these research labs for like 20 to 30 years. So these are like long tenured scientists, many of them PhDs in their fields. And seeing them kind of tell me that, yeah, you can use this and this and this and good luck. I was like, man, that is so crazy. I can't believe you're giving up. And you're the U.S. government. And having worked for the U.S. government before, I was like, yeah, I know that budgets aren't necessarily unlimited all the time, but they can, for all intents and purposes, they can be if you are convincing enough.
Yeah.
To get more funding vehicles, and they seem to just, they're like, well, there's a lot of conflict and there's a lot of da da da, and I was like, it seemed like they not that they were like beaten dogs and just reacting to like constantly being shut down, but it was more like they just maybe, I don't know if they lost the passion or whatever it was, and I feel like the private sector can really stretch its legs and just take. I mean, I took that conversation with them. I was very thankful for it, and and I still know those dudes, but I was like, okay, I'm gonna do my own thing, man. Like I'm not. I can't be subject to this philosophy of innovation stalling because of status quo.
Yeah.
And I think that, the firearms industry has some folks that I think can stretch their legs a little bit because we're not unencumbered by, I guess, tradition. I don't know.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. No, I think you get stuck in ruts and that free market, man, if the free market can be free, stuff happens and stuff stagnates everywhere else. So I'm excited about it. And I even, we have started calling it here at T-Rex the citizen defense industry. Like the citizen defense industry has got some significant room to grow because people have responsibilities to be able to defend their families and their communities and their nations. They carry a lot of that responsibility. You can't just build a giant military industrial complex and be done with that particular responsibility.
That's right.
And the giant, I've been doing some research on this, but military projects, man, they take forever. One of the first animation projects I worked on was actually for the U.S. Navy. And
cool.
That project that I worked on the very beginning of lasted longer than my entire film career. And slowly wound its way through different committees and different funding rounds and different prototypes and moved from this place to that place, eventually ended up at Boeing. Then global war on terror started to happen. And then people were like, oh, we don't need stuff like this anymore. This is Cold War era technology. And and then finally got killed. So that was an unmanned undersea vehicle that was going to go out and hunt for sea mines. And DJI has come out of nowhere and invented like 50 drones in the space of time that project went from Johns Hopkins Applied Research Lab to the first contractor of like 10. So the free market, even in China,
is crazy.
can be so much faster and more agile than some of these big monolithic behemoths. So, and I'm excited about the private sector and the citizen defense industry, and
Yeah.
super excited about what you're doing.
No, thanks, man. I like that philosophy, citizen defense industry. I had a question about what is, because I have my own thoughts on this that I kind of go back and forth on. What's your thoughts on gear or equipment that's being manufactured in China? Like, do you hold that gear to a different standard when there might not be another, like a U.S. alternative, or if it's just a knockoff? Like, I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Interesting. We just had a meeting about this at T-Rex. So, and we kind of broke it down into several categories, which I will not describe in detail because I can't remember exactly which ones we landed on. But one of them was quality. We do not want to sell garbage. So that doesn't rule China out completely. There's a ton of non-garbage stuff that China makes. So the other issues would be things like cost, dependability. We don't want to be relying on China. It was very, very difficult for certain industries that did rely on China a couple of years ago when supply chain stuff went crazy. So we want to not be in that position. And I mentioned DJI earlier. We don't want to be selling spyware, which DJI drones are spyware. So that's a no-go there, not because of quality, not because of dependence, because of the spyware. So we broke it down into several categories to where, we will sell a made-in-China thing, and we would not like to support China directly through intelligence gathering tools. So that's kind of where it breaks down. Because some of the Streamlight lights are made in China, or components of them are made in China. Pretty much all electronic components at this point now are, at some level, those components are coming from China. Like, it is a very hard thing to disentangle yourself from.
Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah, and that's why we kind of broke it down in these categories where we will be as local as possible, get the best value for the customer possible, be as resilient as possible, not dependent on single developers, single supply chains, and then we won't work directly with the Chinese government, and we won't sell spyware. So those are kind of where we ended up, and we're drafting a little bit better internal policy so that, because stuff changes as well. Like, you will be getting something from one manufacturer. You've asked them specifically, like, we want stuff from this facility. And then next thing you know, they're middlemaning it from China.
Yeah. It's a line you can draw, right? It's a metric you can follow. You got, maybe you got to create something. I don't know. I was thinking about it most recently. I think about it a lot, but I was thinking about it most recently because I just got this bag from, I guess what happens when you get into the firearms industry and you get a lot of following, people start sending you stuff. So someone sent me this bag, and it's like a rifle bag. It can carry 2 rifles. It's actually pretty cool. I just used it on a hunting trip. We put 2 rifles in it, and I looked at the tag, and it's made in China. And I was like, wow, this is a really high quality bag. Yeah. It's one of the best bags I've ever used. And I'm thinking to myself, man, like, what does this mean? Mm-hmm. Like, does this mean that the U.S. can't make bags like this? Because I know they can. I just put a big order in. I bought a bunch of stuff from a company in Virginia Beach that supposedly makes all their stuff here in the U.S. And this company's bag is like super awesome, rivaling the quality of this other company. And this is made in China. And this is actually kind of nicer than some of the other companies' stuff. Yeah. And I'm thinking to myself, man, like, what does this mean? And I don't know what it means. I haven't gone through all my thoughts yet. Yeah. But it's like, I kind of want to understand like what it is.
Well, we ran into some issues with nylon soft good manufacturer. I don't know if you heard the entire tale, but we were making a made in America plate carrier.
Okay.
Found a manufacturer, and then we started finding made in Mexico tags inside of these plate carriers that we had certifications signed by the manufacturer saying very compliant, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, long story short, he was outsourcing stuff across the border. And like, this question of where you buy stuff when the quality is the same level is a very complicated question. The issue for us was, of course, we had pitched this bag to our customers as made in America, and it was Some of them were not. And an unknown quantity were not. So
Yeah, that's a problem.
yeah, I can give you the whole story. In fact, you can read the whole story on the website.
Oh, really?
It's an entire saga. Yeah, there are certain things that are nearly impossible to have made in quantity in the United States. And there are shops set up in China that are capable of just really high quality work. And it is kind of a testament to the way that they have modernized their manufacturing industry and the way that we have hamstrung from a regulatory and tax perspective some of our manufacturing industries. And yeah, it's kind of an interesting position. I'm super excited about modern digital manufacturing capabilities like 3D scanning, 3D printing, CNC machines. Like that area of American manufacturing has just had an incredible shot in the arm and an explosion of new growth and competitive capability. And then we had the supply chain shakeup in 2020, 2021 after all the COVID lockdowns in China. Mm-hmm. I'm actually super excited about people doing more local manufacturing, seeing more value in it than just the pure per piece dollar figure, because the reliability of a supplier is going to have a big impact, even if you're only looking at the bottom line. Like a supplier that you can get product from 12 months a year at 10% extra, way more valuable than the cheaper supplier that's only going to be around 6 months of the year. So I see a lot of positive direction in this area, but it's a fascinating one for sure.
Yeah. I think there's a chip manufacturer that just is going to set up shop in Arizona. Is that Intel? Is it Intel?
Oh yeah, there's
I found
there's
it was
Intel.
crazy.
I mean, there's a couple of different ones, but Intel is apparently going to be the biggest one, and then I think there's one going up somewhere near Ohio, I believe, as well. So
which is a big change for semiconductor manufacturing, right?
And that's a huge one, because if you can't make semiconductors, you're kind of hosed.
Yeah, we kind of need those.
Yeah, and so if we can make semiconductors, then I feel like we can make anything. And without too much interruption.
So, do you guys shoot silencers all the time in your I don't know. Do you shoot a lot yourself? I guess is a better question.
The short answer is no. Okay. I used to shoot a lot more, and I've just been busier. I understand. Some of that is T-Rex busyness. Some of that is being a husband and a dad. Life.
Yeah.
So when I shoot, the rifle is always suppressed, and the pistol is never suppressed, with the exception of 22. With 22, everything is always suppressed. There's no reason not to suppress 22. It's so great, and
cool.
Yeah, so that's cool. Kind of where I'm at with it. And then for the other guys who do shoot a lot, the T&E team, the media guys, it generally is rifles are usually suppressed depending on what's being tested. And then handgun suppressors, I mean, we sell the Ragnarok SD, which is, in my opinion, the best way to holster a suppressed pistol.
I need to buy one of those.
Now, the problem that you're going to have with the Rag SD is the Rag SD is conformable. You customize it to your actual setup, but you probably switch setups often enough.
Well, you know what? I don't. So the only reason to use a holster is to carry a weapon. So if I'm just messing around with a pistol and a silencer, it might not be a carry gun. Now, if I'm going to be like carrying around my ranch, or, I'm going to be putting the silencer on the gun that I carry daily, it's a silencer that I don't really change, just because I know it's reliable. So I would probably do that. But you're right. I think I even commented that on Lucas's post the other day or something. It was a couple of weeks ago where I think he shot a pistol with a silencer and it didn't work well. And I was like, yeah, they don't. They usually don't work well. And the reason they don't work well is because they're not designed correctly. But yeah, okay.
I'm actually super hopeful that someone is going to design a handgun, and I've talked about this a little bit in the past, a handgun that is designed to be suppressed, to have a red dot, and to potentially accept a shoulder stock.
That would be awesome.
A handgun that is designed with reality in mind, not American regulations and laws.
Yeah, I mean, there are some there are some pistols that have been designed with silencers in mind. Some of those pistols are from FN. The FNX tactical series, and the 509 tactical series, they're really tested with silencers. It doesn't mean it's going to work awesome with your silencer, but it does mean that if you were used a proper silencer, it would work well. So there are some that are better than others, but yeah, it would be cool. One of my goals, I guess, high-level goals of my effort is trying to educate enough to where I start to link the firearm manufacturers with the silencer manufacturers. And I've had some success already with that, but it's slow going. I think it's going to increase as more people understand the content and education. Several firearm manufacturers have told me that they listen to the podcast. At least their engineering staff does. Aero Precision does, apparently. They were talking to me yesterday. I was like, wow, that's cool. It was an honor. But I was also thinking, okay, it's working. Good. You're getting the information. I've talked to the guys at Beretta that do too. Some guys at FN. So guys at HK.
That's extremely cool.
So they're hearing it, and they're pretty smart people because they're design engineers making systems, and they're very complex. And those manufacturers are pretty high level. So I'm excited about the future. We just got to keep disseminating information using the free market to do it. Yeah. Right. So,
yeah. Thanks for everything that you're doing.
Yeah, man.
Disseminating that information, making sure that customers are informed, making sure that, even engineering teams, I can imagine that it would be really easy to focus on a weapon system.
Absolutely.
Know that suppressors are an option and not have the time or the expertise to really fully understand what that means for your product design. When it is a small percentage of people out there who will do it, and there's so many different variables, and it isn't something that has been adequately studied, in my opinion, until very recently. It would be really easy to be a firearm manufacturer and only just now kind of design with suppressors in mind. So, yeah, I'm really encouraged.
Yeah, there's a tide that is shifting. Folks are realizing that you can't just put a silencer on any gun and have it work. The silencer industry is growing. The silencer consumer market is growing at a very, very fast rate. There are people adopting silencers, and as those people's Form 4s come back approved and they start to get those silencers back and they start to put it on their guns, because the sample size is increasing, you're going to see more and more issues come up with improper firearm physics because of the silencer's influence in the weapon system. And the firearm company didn't talk about it, and the silencer company didn't talk about it, and there's a consumer. And as you know, because you guys sell a lot of stuff to people, when a consumer has a problem, they're going to start to be vocal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the internet is both good and bad for that. It's good that
that's right.
Information gets out there. It is a little bit confusing sometimes when one guy has an issue and 50 people repost it. You're like, oh my goodness, this has happened 50 times. And
you're like, this is an epidemic. And then you're like, wait a minute, it's just one guy who didn't read the instructions.
There is that,
and now you got a whole there's a meme page, and they're talking about oh no, there's a problem with this product, and you're like, well, dude, give us a chance to talk to him.
And I think you just solve that problem with more information. The more educated consumers are, the more they realize, hang on, when you sell 1 million widgets and one breaks, it doesn't mean X. Or, just people need to get better with reading comprehension, listening comprehension. I'm sure that there are people out there who watch Lucas's video and were like, so Lucas said that Aero is the worst firearm company in the entire world.
I thought, that's what a great example.
Well, and the good news is there's 1 million people watching that video. In the comment section, we're like, no, Lucas didn't say that. Here's what the actual video set. So it's this
isn't that cool?
Somewhat self-correcting problem. It's amazing. That's what I love to see. And your fans who go out and explain to people no, when he was testing this device, he did it this way. And you don't have to actually argue with everyone on the internet and be right all the time.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
This is one of the most unintended self-correcting consequences of the PewScience effort. Unofficially, people refer to it as the PewScience Army because it is a team. It's almost like Fight Club. You got these people, they don't even know they're in Fight Club because I don't tell people who the members are. I keep that decentralized on purpose.
Yeah.
I like it that way. So you see these organic cells forming of these pockets of people who are extremely, extremely educated. And it's only the motivated ones that become like that. It's a self-correcting thing. So so they grow, and when someone ends up, slandering, the effort or my effort, I don't even have to do it unless it's a personal thing. Like I have had some things sometimes when someone comes out and says something, I was like, okay, I have to like address this myself because this is like so like flagrant insanity, But usually, I really don't have to say anything because the consumers are so educated and they know that I'm well-meaning. They know the intent. They'll go ahead and do it for me, and I don't have to do it. And it's kind of takes a little bit of a load off me because, gosh, man, you can't police the internet.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Again, one of those things. You can't police the firearm industry. Got its upsides, got its downsides.
Yeah.
It's a good thing, though.
It is. You really have to take the good with the bad. I think as long as you do the right thing, I guess that's one of my main tenets is if you do the right thing, I think you're always going to win. You always be honest and do the right thing. I don't know how you can lose with that.
Yeah. Be self-governing. Set a good example. I can't think of a better way to end the show.
Yeah, man. This was fun.
Well, thanks for coming on. I appreciate everything that you're doing and good time with this conversation, too.
Yeah, I feel like we could do like many, many, many hours of this. So,
well, I was, I had a million technical questions. So,
okay.
A future episode.
Yeah.
A lot of technical conversations we can nerd out about.
Absolutely.
Testing equipment methodology.
No, it was a pleasure, Isaac. It was very nice to meet you. I feel like, since we have the video chat going, feel it is more personal. I like that. And I do enjoy podcasts in which there's a conversation. So I hope folks get something out of this, something out of my rambling.
Again, I appreciate the work you've been doing in the past. I'm looking forward to the future. This was a great conversation. And for you podcast listeners at home, don't forget to look up the Jay Situation podcast and PewScience. There'll be links in the show notes so that you can find all this stuff, the best silencer information, both for individual silencers and also just the science and mechanics. You have the graphs for those of you that understand such things, the text that explain what the graphs mean, and then your podcast is the plain English
That's right.
version and conversation. I really appreciate that you engage with your listeners and answer their questions directly on the podcast. I think that you do a great job of fleshing out some of the complexities without dumbing them down, which is a bit of an art.
Thanks, man.
For those of you listening to this podcast, make sure you check out Jay's stuff. And also, I'd like to answer more questions on this podcast. I just realized I'm pretty bad at that. So if you're listening to this podcast and you have questions, the way that you get in touch with us is probably team@trex-arms.com. It's the best way to get in touch with us, given that podcasts are not super interactive. But thanks very much for listening. We'll be back next week, and we'll be back with Jay sometime to talk about fast transients, what they are, how you see them.
Yeah.
And what they mean.
It'd be awesome. Well, thank you so much, sir. Bye, everybody.